Well, good morning, Longhaultanker here. Straight razor shaving with Longhaultanker. And let me make a micro adjustment here on my camera mount. Ah. I guess that's all right. All right, so today is the 15th of January, Wednesday, 2024. 2025, and it is approximately 9:15, 09:15 on this Wednesday morning. And coming to you from day number 5, let's count them. Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, today's Wednesday. So day number 6, or 5.5, if you will, of breakdown hell. And it happens from time to time, and I'm learning some stuff about my truck and my company. And hey, it's all right. I'm getting paid at least something, and it's better than a sharp stick in the eye. And so it's okay. It's okay. I just got to tell my brain and my body it's okay. I'm convinced that much of my personal ailment, I don't even know if that's the right word, ailment, sickness, not feeling well, weight loss, I've lost almost 25 pounds in 6 weeks. And I think most people would call that unusual or abnormal. And for me, you can see it mostly in the face. And I would show you my waistline, but I'm not going to, because you can dramatically see it there as well. Anyway, on with the shave. I did do a shave yesterday morning, thinking that I was going to get underway. And I did a kind of a one-pass shave just to knock the tops off and get going. The good news is that I have delivered my product, albeit the weekend. Should have delivered on Friday. The weekend, didn't get it delivered on Monday. Thought I was going to get it, and then finally got it delivered yesterday. Thank God, and just barely. Anyway. So let's move on here a little bit, introduce the equipment, and then I'll carry on with the story. You've seen me use this razor here on this trip, the Fox Cutlery. Well, that's coming in quite nicely right there. Fox Cutlery, little 5/8 barber's notch, honed on the Zulu gray, and quite sharp. And I've been using this, relegated this to the head shaving selection, where it's done very nicely. But I gave it a whirl yesterday on the one-pass shave. But I've got plenty of whiskers for a 3-pass shave today, and we'll go through that. And the soap this morning, we've used it a couple of times, is the Barrister, and man, waves. I'm not real crazy about this soap. It's another one of those soaps where it's just a thick, smeary oil grease like soap, and I hesitate even calling it a soap. And you'll see why as we move along. Now, I always carry 2 brushes with me, my primary and secondary. The primary is usually, here lately, it's my second string Badger brushes that I have been using. But as a backup or secondary brush, I always carry with me my Sterling Badger, 31 millimeter, made by Zenith, and it's a lovely brush. All right, and a little bit later we'll use the alum Ozma Allen block. So I've had a nice hot shower. Day number 5, trapped on the road, broke down, and so I've had to do some hand washing of garments today. I will say that Waves, Bear Shine Man Waves, smells awful good. Smells awful good. Now, I'm not going to use a lot of soap. In fact, I don't think that's part of the problem, but I am going to go much lighter. And as you can see, just a few swirls and start applying and see what kind of results I get. And like so many of these boutique specialty artisan style soaps, I'm not crazy about them. These bases, and A&E, I'm not crazy about because they have the same. And I'm not trying to be ugly. I'm just giving you my honest opinion. In contrast to some of the old traditional regulars like Tabac and Mitchell's Wool Fat and Cella. They are good tallow soaps. When I say tallow, some of them are reformulating. Certainly, Martin de Condé is an excellent soap. Probably top tier, best you can, among the very best you can buy in the world, I'm going to say. I'm dipping my tips of my brush in the water in the sink. Okay, so as I have reaccounted in some of the last couple of videos, my truck broke down. That is to say, it stopped running, and for about 20 minutes before it stopped running, there was an awful vibration in the idle that woke me up from a sleep. And that was at approximately 12:15. That would be 0015 Friday morning, midnight. And by 12:30, my truck had choked itself out and wouldn't start back up. Well, and it was 27 degrees outside. Nobody wants to get stuck in a freezing truck, a freezing or a sweltering truck. Both are potentially dangerous and injurious to the human body. And I certainly did not want to get, well, as it turned out, as I was, abandoned. And I wasn't happy about that either. But we'll pass over that. So the next morning, Saturday morning, I was at the Love's Truck Stop in Midland, Texas, and told them what the problem was, and so they're not real heavy duty mechanics. All right, let's get started with the Fox cutlery. But they changed the fuel filter, the sight glass water separator filter. Whoops, look at that, I caught it with my hand. And for the couple hours or so after they changed the filter, they ran the same test that I did earlier in the day, and that was just let the engine run, time it, and see how long it takes before it chokes itself out, which it did. After several attempts, it would run for 15 to 20 minutes and choke itself out. It was not maintaining RPMs, and consequently, no RPMs, no oil pressure, no oil PSI on the gauge. It was dropping into the red zone and consequently choking itself out. Emergency shutoff. And so the real question is, what is causing the lack of engine power, the lack of RPMs that consequently results in lack of oil pressure that results in emergency shutoff? And that's been happening consistently time after time after time. Now, the mobile mechanic that was ultimately called out and arrived about 6:30, 7 o'clock Saturday, or Friday, what was Friday, I'm sorry, Friday evening, he was of the opinion, he said that, well, the next obvious place to try is the fuel pump. So, and because of the nature of the truck, and keep this in mind because it's going to play a factor as of yesterday, I've got a Peterbilt truck with a 1999 Detroit, I think it's Series 60, diesel engine in it. Now, just keep that in mind because it turns into a comedy of errors because of that. And it's what they call a glider kit. And I think it's Fredericks, but you can look them up on the internet. All right, so he gets it changed. Well, one thing, he gets the fuel filter changed, and I get called back to the truck at about 1 p.m. Saturday. Sunday, I think. And because it's starting to all just kind of all run together. And at 1 p.m., 1300 on Sunday, I believe it is, and I'm assured that the truck is repaired and ready to go. And indeed, turned it on, got it started, and it ran from about 1 o'clock to 6:30, 18:30 p.m. And violent rocking and shuddering of the truck, the idle, and eventually it dropped in RPMs and so by about 6:30, 6:45, it choked itself out. Well, the mobile mechanic had said, if you need me, call me. And so sure enough, at about 6:30, 6:45 Sunday evening, I called him. I said, I'm sitting here choked out. I'm sitting in a dead truck and it's starting to get cold. And I said, this is ridiculous. Well, I wasn't too hostile, but, and he's a good guy. And he said, I'll be right there. Well, actually, what he said is I'm on a job. I'll be there as soon as I can. Give me an hour. So I gave him an hour. Then I started calling him. And of course, a lot of these guys, they don't like to be bugged because they are working on other people's equipment. But I do think he made it out by 8:30. 20:30. Now, don't forget that last week or week before last, I was broke down because there was a punctured oil pan, whatever that may or may not have to do with the present situation, but just keep it in mind. So my mobile mechanic, he makes it out, like I say, about 8 something, 8:30. It's starting out. He's looking at it. He's fooling around with it. And I say to him, I said, am I going to the hotel tonight? He said, probably. So I called and made a reservation, and sure enough, I did. And that was Sunday night. Yeah. Because Saturday, he had to order the fuel filter. I don't know how it got there so quick or when it got there quite exactly, but anyway. And who knows, maybe he didn't put a new fuel filter in and said he did, but he would have to have the invoice and the shipping information. So I don't know that I can doubt him on that point. Although, it's not really it's not my truck. I don't pay for parts. It's just, there's a lot of fraud in truck repairs, you might imagine. A lot of padding, false invoicing, etc. It just happens. That's just the nature of the game. Anyway, so as I say, he put the new oil filter in. He came back out, did some other fooling around. So a little bit of oil got on the ground. He said, look, I want you to move the truck out of this spot, and I want you to move it over to that spot, and I said, okay, whatever you want, as long as we can keep it running and keep the oil pressure up and keep the RPMs up. He said, yeah, it's just a little short move, and he says, it'll probably choke out a few times as you're trying to move the truck. Don't let that bother you. Just keep it moving. And if you need to restart it, restart it. Okay, fine. And indeed, as we moved, and I'm still having a loaded trailer. Haven't made it to the customer yet to unload. And so I get the truck moved. I get it moved from this parking place over to that parking place. It doesn't have wet standing oil or antifreeze or any other product in the parking place, especially where a mechanic might want to lay down and get underneath there. And so I get the truck moved and parked and straightened out and settled. And he comes over to me and he says, I know what the problem is with your truck. He said, as you were moving the truck and it was choking out and you were having to restart it, you had white and gray smoke just billowing out of your smokestack, exhaust stack. And I said, well, what does that tell you? He says, you probably have a fouled a fuel injector. Now, I don't know what the difference is on a diesel truck with a diesel fuel injector as opposed to a gasoline engine with a fuel injection, but I don't believe that they're exactly the same. I just got water, ice water in my cup there. So I've got a fouled fuel injector. And he says, I've reached the end of my capabilities as a mobile mechanic on the road working in a truck stop parking lot. He said, you're going to need a tow to a real shop, a real diesel mechanic. And I said, okay, do you mind calling my boss and telling him? Because I'm not really, hadn't been talking to my boss much and I haven't been feeling good about it. And he said, sure, I'll take care of it. You're going to need a tow, so I'll get that all set up with your boss's permission and cooperation and so forth. Get a tow set up. We'll get a mechanic shop identified. And so that was Sunday night. And so I went on to the hotel. By the way, Holiday Inn Express in Midland, Texas is a top-notch hotel. Clean, comfortable, excellent staff, front desk manager, and I will say the nighttime front desk clerk also were both extremely helpful. Now I'm currently, because they were no vacancies sold out yesterday. Oh, we're so sorry, Mr. Leon, that we can't help you. Well, I'm going to call back over there this morning when I'm done with my shave to see if I can get booked in over there for tonight and the next 3 or 4 days to see how long it's going to take them to get my truck. And there's more to the story, and I'll carry on here in just a minute. Now, I hope you can see with this shaving soap, Barrister and Man, that it's just smearing like grease. It's not lathering in any sense of the normal word that a straight razor wet shaver would understand lather to be lathering. And I don't know why that is. And this soap, I started getting some of these exotic brands like Barrister and Man and A&E and Zingari about 3 years ago, and so they come up in rotation. I've got about 70 soaps, and they all come up in rotation. I will say I've had no problem with Sterling soaps, but anyway, and so I hadn't heard. So that was where we left it Sunday night. What they did on Monday, I have no idea. Nobody communicated with me until about 8 p.m. Sunday night. My mobile mechanic texted me and he said, I'm going to come pick you up in the morning about 8 o'clock, which would have been yesterday morning, Tuesday. Take you to your truck. Your truck is ready. And I called him and I said, I thought you were out of the loop. I thought it was going to be towed to a truck. No, it didn't get towed. We did some more stuff to it and we think it's ready to go, meaning him and my boss, which tells me that either the mobile mechanic or the boss called each other and they worked out a side deal to get by on the cheap, to just put a patch on it, whatever the patch might be, to get me and the truck back to Houston. Okay, fine. Except I told my boss, and by the way, yesterday morning at 8 o'clock, the mobile mechanic who was going to come pick me up and take me back to the truck bailed out on me. He said, I can't make it. I'm helping somebody else. You're going to have to get an Uber back to the truck. Well, first of all, I'm still thinking that the truck had been towed and was at a repair center somewhere, and I didn't know where. And he says, I've got to make my own way there. And so I called my boss. I said, where's the truck? If I'm supposed to make my own way back to the truck, I said, the mechanic bailed out on me. I don't have any idea where the truck's at. Where's the truck? And so, as you might imagine, that caused some consternation on my part, that I'm having to trace and run down my own truck because they didn't tell me on Monday what they were doing and what they hadn't done, namely tow the truck to a repair center. Not that I could have done anything about that. I couldn't have argued against it. But how do you go from, I know what's wrong with your truck, you got a fouled injector, diesel injector, to, oh, we did this and this, and we think that's good enough. And so my boss texted me as I got to the truck. I said, arriving truck. Because it's still in the truck stop, the Love's truck stop in Midland, and hadn't moved all weekend, except when I moved it to that other parking place. And so I get to the truck, texted my boss and said, I'm approaching the truck, arriving at truck. He shoots a text back and he says, how's it look? How's it sound? How's it running? And I'm just getting in there, just getting my gear stowed away. I do get it started. I said, it's running. I said, RPMs are at 700 and the oil pressure is at 55 or 50-ish. Kind of right between the 40 and the 60 mark on the oil PSI gauge. Okay, fine. And I called him and I said, I called him by name, I'm not going to, I said, boss, I said, I feel like I'm being set up for failure. Because in just the few minutes that we've had the truck running, and the gauges have been between, RPMs at 700, oil PSI started off at about 50, 55-ish. They are declining. I can see ever so slightly in just the 5-10 minutes that I've had it running that they're starting to decline. I said, this thing's gonna break down on the drive to, and I was about 15 minutes away from delivery, and that was the goal yesterday morning. We've got to get the trailer and the product delivered. I say the trailer. I've got to get there and air off or compressor off which means you run air into the tank. You pressurize the tank like a Coke can, and because that the carbon soda, the soda inside of it pressurizes the can. That's why you open a Coke can and it goes. And so you got to pressurize the trailer in order to get the product off. And it's an easy process. You just hook up a discharge hose and an air pressure hose to the tank and the compressor. And it's an easy process. As long as all the valves open as they're supposed to, and sometimes they don't. But that's another story. But they did yesterday. But here's the thing. I said I was being set up for failure, and as soon as I arrived at the customer, brought the truck and the trailer into place for unloading, which means the back end of the trailer, 50 feet, 60 feet back there, lined up with that tank where I'm supposed to hook up the hoses. As soon as I got there and took the truck out of gear, guess what happened? The truck died and I couldn't get it restarted. Now, how am I supposed to unload the product when I don't have a running truck, and a running truck is required to operate the onboard compressor? Comedy of errors, one after another. And the best one's still yet to come. And so, now as I arrived there was one of our fellow drivers there from the same company. And we're a small company, about 15 trucks, and that's it. And he was getting himself ready to pull out, and indeed he did, and left the property. But I'm sitting in a dead truck. I said, "Boss man, what am I supposed to do?" And he said, "Well, I'll get the other driver to come back and help you out with his compressor." All that needed to be done was to hook up my airline to his compressor. Everything else was, the connections had already been made, from the discharge valve on the rear of my trailer to their intake valve at the storage tank, to the airline where the airline goes in on my trailer. And so the only thing I'm holding is the other opposite end of my airline that goes to his compressor. Well, he gets there And he says, Leon, my compressor is probably, at least my truck is running and yours is not, but I'm not putting off but hardly 10 PSI from my air compressor, and it took me almost 2.5 hours to unload, and normally a 1 hour process. And so we carried on like that for about 30 minutes or so. He arrived, hooked up my airline, he got his compressor going, and so now we got all the valves open, we've got all of the product is entering into their storage tank. Albeit at a very slow rate. And so the other driver says to me, he said, as a matter of curiosity, he says, would you mind starting your truck and let's see if we can get your compressor going? Because if we can get yours going, it'll probably do a much better job than mine. I said, well, sure, don't be surprised if it doesn't start. Well, lo and behold, it started, my truck, which we had discovered, the mobile mechanic and I, and even the Loves people, when they were fooling around with it, that if you let it sit for a little while, my truck, between failed attempts, it would start and jump up to the normal operating ranges of RPM and oil pressure and all of that. So it did. It started at normal ranges, and we immediately engaged my compressor, and it ran, and it started pumping out product from the trailer to their storage tank at a much greater rate of speed than his truck. So most of the work, we'd gotten about 1,000 gallons off from my truck into their storage tank, and there remained about 4,000 gallons in my truck to put into their storage tank. And my truck, my compressor, completed the task. And the truck's still running. But what I did is that while we got everything shut down, we closed their receiving tank valve, we shut down my truck's discharge valve, we decompressurized the tractor, or the tank, the trailer. What we didn't do is we did not disengage my truck's PTO, which was operating the compressor, because when you got the PTO on and engaged, the RPMs stay up at about 1,100, between 1,000 and 1,100 RPM. Very nice shape. And that those high RPMs is what we wanted to keep the oil PSI, oil pressure, in normal operating range. And it was working. So we didn't turn the PTO off, but we shut everything else down. And after I got the signatures on all the documents, and my other buddy, he was making his way out of the plant. I made my, as soon as we got everything done, and all that remained to do was for my truck to be put into gear, disengage the PTO, put my truck into gear, and get out of Dodge. And get the truck rolling. Under its own power, of course. And so my boss calls me and says, I'm going to send you over to the Peterbilt repair center. And Peterbilt contracts with a company called Rush Trucks or Rush Trucking Service Centers. And they're the authorized service centers for Peterbilt. Okay, good, fine. And so I arrive at the Rush Truck Service Center, authorized service dealer for Peterbilt trucks. And my boss had called ahead and told him I was coming. And so I get there. Oh, yes, we're expecting you. Your boss called, et cetera, et cetera. I said, well, let me tell you the story, because my boss has his story and I've got my story. And while they're not too terribly dissimilar, they are different. And I said right up front, I said, my boss is trying to get by on the cheap, and I just want it fixed so I can get back to Houston. And, oh yes, Mr. Leon, we understand. And so I told him my story about what was happening with the truck and the behavioral characteristics of the truck that were going on. I explained everything. And then I get to the end of the story. Of course, I'm not exactly short-winded, am I? And so, I tell the story, I get to the end of the story, and I said, oh, by the way, the truck is a glider kit. And they were young people and they looked confused. And I said, glider kit is a Peterbilt truck that has had the engine, the Peterbilt engine removed, and a Detroit diesel engine put in the frame. And as soon as I said Detroit diesel, They looked at each other. The young lady went to the senior manager in the back. She comes back later and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to have to reject you. We do not work on Detroit engines." That, in my mind, that was the height of the calamity, was that Peterbilt will not work on a Peterbilt truck because it's not a Peterbilt truck. It's got a Peterbilt wrapper, name tags, etc. But it doesn't have a Peterbilt engine. It's got a Detroit engine. And so who do we go to? I said, who do we go to? He said, well, you have to go to Freightliner or this other company that specializes in Detroit diesel engines, namely Stewart and Stevenson. Never heard of them. But apparently they're very well known. And so I got over there, and my boss was on the phone. They called him, the Rush Service Center, called my boss and said, yeah, we don't work on Detroit. And I think he was just, it's just one more thing to pull his hair out over. But I find it difficult to believe that he didn't know all this, getting glider. And these were, you might say, grandfathered in trucks. And I also learned from the other driver that I was working with yesterday that all of our trucks are broke down and all of them are in serious need of mechanical overhauls, in the truest sense of the term. An overhaul, which is a repair procedure to a truck's diesel engine that costs typically in the neighborhood of $20,000 to get a true overhaul of a diesel engine. And a lot of drivers, owner-operators, approaching 1 million miles will do that because Detroit engines will easily run 5 to 10 million miles when properly serviced. But that's the key, isn't it? Properly serviced. So that's kind of where everything stands right now. And it was funny on a text message exchange with my boss as we were talking about where to go and how to get this thing fixed and turning it into a truck service center, whether it was Rush Trucking or whether it was Stewart and Stevenson. One of the things I saw was when I pulled into Stewart and Stevenson yesterday afternoon, one of the first things I saw, we are experts in Detroit engines. Oh, thank you. That's good to know right up front. They gave me a real positive sense. And so as I got in there and met those people and sat with the service manager for a minute and told him the same story that I had told the young lady over at Rush Trucking, he says, what you say makes sense. There are things from what you said I can, take and use and glean from. Now, he did tell me, because I went and packed up my gear, and he came out with one of his mechanics. I was talking to the service manager, and they opened the hood on the truck and looked inside, and he comes back to me and he says, well, one of the things we noticed right off the bat is that you're losing compression. We can hear it, we can see it. You're losing compression. And I said, oh, really? He said, yes, and that's usually a sign of like a head gasket or some sort of valve seals that are leaking pressure. And that's probably where you're losing your RPM pressure and your oil pressure, is because you're losing general compression pressure in the which made sense to me. If you're losing the main compression, it's understandable the secondary compression is also being lost, and I get that. At least I think I do. Don't ask me any more about the implications of that, but I put a little more soap on my brush for my head shave. But that's oh, and then bless their heart, I called the Holiday Inn because I knew I was going to need a hotel. I said to my boss on the text message, I said, so I guess that means I'm going to the hotel tonight. And he didn't respond. He kept talking back to me on the text message, 2 or 3 messages later. And then I shot again. I said, so I guess that means I'll be in a hotel by 4 o'clock this afternoon. And he said, yes, by 4 o'clock. Because I'm just not going to play this. I'm going to lay in the truck until it gets 27 degrees outside, and not show any concern, human concern. And I'm not going to let that pass. What happened early Friday morning will never happen again. Even if it means I pack up my gear and go to the hotel without explicit permission, I'm going. Because I'm not going to be left in a freezing truck overnight. Unless, I'm out in the middle of nowhere. So today is day number 5 and a half, 5 nights in a hotel in Odessa, Midland. But after talking with that driver who had been with the company for a while yesterday, who came out to give me a hand with his compressor, his truck, he's using a temp truck. He's using the one lone empty truck, non-assigned truck that the company still has at the present, which is what my truck was, the temp truck, the one unassigned truck. Before I got into it, it was the one everybody else was using, which seems, oddly strange with all that was wrong with it, even when I got into it. But I suppose the good news with one of the things I found out that they did on Monday and not told me was, of course, I know that on Saturday they ordered and replaced, through Saturday and Sunday, ordered and replaced the fuel pump Then I understand that they ordered and replaced the oil pump and some other relevant piece of equipment. I'm just not sure what it is. But like a lot of things in repair, even in home repair, you do the most obvious first. Fuel pump, oil pump, things. As soon as you start having to go inside the engine, overhauls and fouled injector replacements, etc. Now you're talking serious money. In fact, the two places that I went to yesterday, Rush Trucking and Stewart and Stevenson, said that their open bench rate was $250 an hour. And that's a lot of money for anybody to spend on repairs. $250. Well, like I said, I'm kind of long-winded. It's taken me an hour pretty much to tell that story. But I'm almost through with the shave as well. Yeah, okay. So I'm anxious to get home and see my wife. Now, don't forget that I went to Florida. Delivery in Florida and the puncture in the oil pan was a week ago Friday, so that's 10 days ago. When I got and was in the hotel for a few days, 2 or 3 days. And I got back from that load and he sent me off on this load. He told me to go home. And I had about 10 to 12 hours at home before coming back to the truck. And that was what? That load time was a week ago today, if I remember correctly, on a Wednesday at 5 o'clock in the morning. Whoops, yes, because drive here on Thursday, delivery on Friday, but it all broke down. I got a pair of clippers in the truck and I failed to bring them with me. But I sure could use them. I'd feel a lot better. I've got a missing flashlight too that's come up missing. I don't know where it's gotten off to. My wife, anyway, flashlights. Me and flashlights don't get along very well because I've lost so many of them. Well, today's the 15th. We got 5 days until the 20th of January, which is the inauguration. And going to be very interesting to see how things proceed. Looking forward to that very much. And it just brings joy to my eyes to see President-elect Trump's nominees for cabinet posts being confirmed, and the process that they're going through, and some of the things that are being said and done on behalf of Hegseth and others. Tulsi Gabbard. And I understand Marco Rubio had that's an interesting pick for Secretary of State. Well, that all feels real good. My head there's the only little nick that I got up on top there that don't look pretty. All right, let's... Good job with the boar brush. Not crazy about this soap. I think I'm gonna make a prediction here that in the not too distant future, I'm gonna just do a quick lather job on some of these specialty artisan soaps, Bearsher and Mann, Zingari, A&E, and the ones that are just real yicky, oily, pasty, not paste, yes, pasty, but more greasy than they are lather. I'm gonna call them out. I'm gonna call them because I really don't like them. Really don't like them. And with each use, as they come up in rotation, I just remind myself, I really don't like these. So I'm using the Osma alum block, and it feels just almost like there's nothing there. Oh, you know what I forgot? Back of the neck. All right, let's wash this off because we don't want alum to get anywhere near the carbon steel. Besides, it's just that touch, just that rub. The alum is doing what it's supposed to do, which is, I don't know, sanitize and assist in closing the pores, I suppose. I go back over it twice like this, once with the right hand, once with the left hand, because each hand brings a different angle of perspective to the target area. Oh yeah, that's real nice. And you're always picking up a little bit more. With each different angle that you can manifest. But I'll get this uploaded today. They told me at the Stewart and Stevenson they probably weren't going to start on it until this morning anyway to hook up to all the diagnostics. That they were going to run a 2-hour diagnostic. But I just find it interesting that with their preliminary visual inspection or examination yesterday, they were able to see that I was losing compression and truck was probably in need of an overhaul. Well, it's got almost 1 million miles on it. Yes, it's in need of a overhaul. But because I know that my boss and the driver from my company that was helping me yesterday, his primary truck, again, he's driving a temporary truck, but his primary truck is under breakdown and the recommendation is a full overhaul. Well, I bet that's what's going to come back on mine as well, and that's not what my company wants to hear. And it may not even be so much my boss who doesn't want to hear that as perhaps maybe his superiors. But we'll see how that part of the story plays out. Where does a trucking company go if the senior management won't give you the funds necessary to repair your equipment or to replace your equipment? That's one of the things I've noticed is that at least most of the trucking companies that I've worked for have a replacement program, whether it's after after 4 years, 5 years, or a mileage marker like 500,000 miles, most companies are looking to offload those used trucks, and they go to the secondary market, which means owner-operators and lease agreements, and they dump those older trucks with 500,000 miles on them because they don't want the upkeep, they don't want the breakdowns charges that are going to inevitably be coming. And so they put them off onto schlubs like, well, I ain't going to say me, because that's why I never went into lease an owner-operator. Never done that, because I knew that unless I went and bought a new truck, for $200,000, $175, $150 on my own, which, I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to tie myself up into that, because you got to keep running. And when I came into trucking, I was just old enough to be too old to tie myself into a 10-year contract or a 10-year program before I reached real profitability. Anyway, enough of all that. I'm done. Hour and 12 minutes. Thank you very much for staying with me. I'm done, and we'll see you down the road.